hopefully we are streaming to all the folks that have decided to sit in on this sort of informal Skyloom Fireside chat. This is going to be an interesting conversation. We've got some pretty interesting personalities on the line here, and we should have been recording about 30 minutes ago because the conversation has been awesome right up until we went live. So before we dive into who's on the show and what we're going to talk about, just a little bit of housekeeping. This is, like I said, a Skyloom Fireside chat. We're going to be talking about, just sort of photography, artificial intelligence, all that cool stuff. We're going to dive into these guys' work a little bit and find out what makes them tick, why they shoot what they shoot, etc. There is a chat room, obviously. This is a Zoom. I think many of us have been in a Zoom or two over the last year or so. So it's the same thing. So if you have a question or you want to interact, please do so in the chat. There is a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen on the right there. I believe it's on the right on your UI. If you have a question that you want to pose, go ahead and just put it in there, and I'll be acting as moderator and sort of filtering out the most pertinent questions for these guys. But this chat will be a little bit different than just your traditional sort of webinar. Like I said, this is a fireside chat, and the goal is to make it more, the metaphor would be like, this is four guys that are sitting in a coffee shop or a bar or something, and we all love photography and we all use similar software, and we're just chatting about photography and where it might go and what it looks like for us and all that cool stuff. So throw your chat messages in there, and throughout the discussion, I'll be up-leveling and interjecting in the conversation with your questions versus pushing them all off to the end and then doing them there. I've set aside some time at the end of the presentation or the end of the fireside chat to dive into Q&A in case we miss some, but feel free to throw them in there and we'll get to them when we can. Also, if there's a ton of questions and we can't get to everything, inside the Luminar AI community, Luminar Insiders, or the Luminar Insiders community, we will be answering questions in there, and the folks from Skyloom will be answering questions in there in case we don't get to them during this hour. So that's a housekeeping. Oh, last thing. Yes, there will be a recording available. Everyone always asks that. Yes, there will be a recording available at some point over the next day or so after the stream ends. So with that, quick introductions, let's do it alphabetically. So Albert, you win, right? So we're going alphabetically by first name. Albert Dros is a landscape photographer. If you've seen his work, we'll link to all of these guys' portfolios and their web pages and their Instagrams after the show, after this interaction. But world-class landscape photographer. The work that you'll see when you click on his stuff is just outstanding. He has created some look packs for Skyloom that allow you to sort of incorporate his style and work into your work. We're going to talk about that a little bit as we progress through the presentation. But landscape, next up, Bastian Werner. Bastian, I got this right, Bastian. We're practicing this before we started streaming. Extreme weather photographer. So
yes.
I was calling him a people photographer. He's an extreme weather photographer, photographing around the world, taking photos of supercells, lightning strikes, putting himself in harm's way to capture images that then, obviously you can use your shots in some cases as well. We're going to talk about that and why he's storm chasing and what drives a storm chaser to storm chase, other than making great images. And then last but not least is Elia Locardi. Elia is a travel photographer I had the opportunity to interview Elia several months ago. Just outstanding photographer, outstanding personality, has been around the world, has been in all kinds of situations, knows his way around, obviously, the camera, but also the planet and how to interact with people to get shots and how to move fluidly. It's amazing. All of us individually could talk for hours one-on-one, but we have to pack all this into one-ish hours during this presentation. So that's it. That's my housekeeping. Let's dive in, guys. So welcome to the Skyloom Fireside Chat. You guys ready to chat? I'm excited.
Yeah, it's great. And I was just going to say with everybody, if you have technical questions, we'll put Albert's phone number
in the chat.
Yes.
So feel free, just all night, day, it doesn't matter. He loves it.
And
We'll answer all your questions.
right under that will be Elia's home address. So just feel free to stop by for a cup of coffee.
True. Yeah. You can, check out
it's a
the
nice
pool.
I know a nice pool. Yeah.
Elia, let's kick it off with you, man. Let's talk a little bit about, your work. And again, guys, this is an open discussion. This is an interview format. We're just going to be chit-chatting. Elia, what drives you? Why are you a photographer? Let's just start with that, because it's an interesting question I like to ask people, and I always get different answers. What makes you want to shoot?
What makes me want to shoot now? I mean, photography was an accident. I didn't mean to become a photographer. It was just after a career in motion design and visual effects, and then the housing crisis in 2008, I was done. And I picked up a camera and decided to start traveling and loved it. And my kind of rule to myself with photography was that I didn't care if it made money. I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted to make sure that it stayed a passion regardless. And then over the last 10 or 12 years, it's just developed into so many different avenues, but I love it. And I think it's because of the interaction with people. So I never thought I was a foodie until I started, really traveling and getting into that. There are all these things I didn't know that I liked, but photography for me is kind of the catalyst to be able to get in there and create interesting stories and meet interesting people. So I'm not just there photographing tiger's nests in Bhutan. I'm actually hanging out with the locals. I'm staying in people's homes and asking for old stories and just really learning about cultures, people, everything, all these things that you can't find if you're just Googling it. That's what drives me, is this desire for knowledge and desire for connection with people all over the world. And the photography just is a way to communicate the same language sometimes. We can all enjoy it, but it's sort of the vessel that we use in order to achieve other means.
It's the camera is the Trojan horse into situations that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to enter into.
That's exactly right. And it's cool because you'll always, especially these days, everybody's a photographer, whether they identify as one or not. So if you're taking photos, somebody's going to look at your photos, somebody's going to ask, people are looking at each other's iPhones and iPads. And it's awesome. It's this international language that transcends borders, religions, and politics. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, in the chat, before we continue, David Swinney is asking, he says, the topic of the chat was advertised as landscape photography. How does that reconcile with the more general topics you just said would be the focus? Well, that's one of the topics, because clearly we have landscape photographers on the show. So by default, we're talking about landscape photography.
And there may be a beautiful landscape behind one of us as we're speaking.
May or may not. Yeah, I could put one up if you guys want real quick.
Change your background.
Put up the beach.
Yeah, but in all seriousness, these guys know their way around landscape. We're going to obviously, for sure touch and talk a lot about landscape photography. But in the context of just overall, right? I want to focus this landscape photography, as we all know, is light, right? It's the rules of photography are light, composition, exposure, post-processing, all that stuff. The subject of landscape, we're going to dive into that and what are some of the techniques of these guys to get the landscapes that they shoot. But we're going to be talking about a ton of other stuff as well. Bastian, you're here, man. I was stalking you online last night, looking at some of the work, and I'm just like, just awe-inspiring weather shots. It's like, how do you do that? Like, most people, when they see that thing in the sky, they can't go the opposite direction fast enough. It's kind of like the universe saying, danger, go away, right? You go towards. Tell us about that. Why are you into supercell and extreme weather photography?
Actually, I need to go a little bit more back in time to explain this. I can't remember this, but I was born with an interest in aircrafts, and so I learned how to fly a sailing plane. And for a sailing plane, you need to know really much about weather. And at some point, I wanted to be the best sailing pilot in my teenager years. So I need to learn how to forecast the weather and to read the clouds. And at one point, it was more fascinating for me to understand what is happening in the sky than actually flying, because everyone is there like, oh my God, you're a pilot, but I can say it's like driving a car. When you're 18, it's nice to drive a car, but with some time, it's like, yeah, you're just driving. It's like the same in the plane for me, but the weather is just more. It's such a big subject that I need to spend my whole lifetime and can't shoot everything I want about weather. And actually, most people don't see how much work is behind those pictures, because normally they're like, yeah, there's landscape and there's a sunset, there's a thunderstorm over the landscape, and I think I was just there by luck and take a shot. But it's actually really much forecast. You look at professional weather models, which are given out by the German Weather Service, and then I check exactly where's the location where the weather occurs. And when you do this is not so dangerous, because I can be out there and I can look onto a supercell, and I can see by the cloud rotation and the movement of the clouds where there will be a tornado. And so I can drive with my car and my team the exact spot to take a picture of the supercell tornado, but we won't get hit by it. So that's the state of the art. You have to do it.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that, because I want to dive a little bit deeper into that, because what you described, it reminds me of that movie Twister, from the 80s, I think it was, where they were just trying to get data from superstorms and tornadoes, and you're trying to capture them. So yeah, I would definitely want to talk about. Albert, you're on the show as well. So yeah, I definitely want to get an idea, like what in the chat right now, people are buzzing about landscape photography. What's great about landscape, or can we talk about landscape photography and how Luminar tools relate to landscape photography? Can you talk a little bit about your history and how you got started in that genre, and do you dabble in other genres as well?
Yeah, sure. I'm a bit similar to Elia, actually. I also have a design background, and I used to work for television. I used to work on game shows and stuff. I think I started photography about 9 years ago, when I was living in Hong Kong for 2 years. I wanted to do something completely different, and I went to work there. I got my master's degree there as well in Hong Kong. And there I kind of started photography. I mean, there's like a photography fever there. Everyone is walking around with also this manual cameras, and you have all these little labs everywhere where you can develop your photos as well. And everyone knows when you visit a new spectacular location, you want to capture it, right? So everyone is taking pictures with their smartphones now as well, and especially in new locations, it's very inspiring to basically capture everything you see. And that's what happened to me in Hong Kong. Really, I wanted to capture everything, like the neon lights reflecting with the rain, in the street, the spectacular skyline. For me, it's still one of the most amazing skylines in the world, actually. But you also have a lot of street photography. Obviously, you have these night markets where you can see all these interesting people. And then you have also the amazing landscapes, actually, that so many people don't realize, but there's like amazing hills around the city from where you can basically combine landscape and cityscape photography. And that's where I really, really got into photography. And I got really kind of addicted to it, and I'm sure many people can relate. When you really get into photography, it can be extremely addicting, and I'm still addicted to it right now, 10 years later. I'm doing photography 24/7 basically. I think most of us are like that. When we're not shooting outside, we're doing everything that has something to do with photography. We're doing maybe work on our website, social media, administrative stuff, working on like editing, all this kind of stuff. So 24, I'm really still really addicted to photography. And I'm really, it's really nice to be here because this year, actually, before the COVID situation, we still went to Iceland with Skyloom. And I was there as well. So actually, I'm curious to also people in the chat, please tell me if you were on that camp, because I would like to know, because it was, I had a really good time with like 50 people from the Skyloom. And it was great to be there and, shoot everything, shoot all the amazing landscapes, of course, do the teaching, processing. And it was just a really good experience. And it's so nice that we got to do that right before, well, basically now, we are not traveling that much anymore. So yeah, we're doing a lot of other stuff. I still did quite well, some traveling in Europe, but like everything really changed. So I think most of us are doing a little bit of different stuff right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks in the chat are asking if we're going to show images. And Peter, thank you for sharing the URLs for all of these guys. That's fantastic. So feel free to click through. That's a great idea. Absolutely. I'll pull up some web pages as we step through this, and we can talk to some images versus, just our ugly mugs on screen all the time. I want to talk about the gear itself. Let's segue the conversation. All photographers, of course, are just gear nuts. And the big question that usually comes up with photographers, or a lot of photographers, is what are you shooting with? If it's a beginning photographer and they're say, enamored with Elia's work and they want to be like Elia, the natural reaction is to, okay, I gotta get the stuff that Elia uses, and I gotta wear what he wears, and what shoes is he wearing? I gotta put on those shoes. Elia is a travel photographer and someone who needs to be nimble and quick and just sort of on the go all the time, but still have gear that is robust and reliable, and all that stuff. What do you go to? Like, what's your, you get a call from big client A today after the webinar and says you need to be, in Israel or someplace tomorrow shooting an assignment. What goes with you and what stays home?
It depends on the assignment. So I've evolved a lot. I started with Nikon, got into Fujifilm, X series, which is APS-C. A lot of the work that you see me share is not medium format. It's shot on an old APS-C sensor, D700. I basically evolved to the needs of what it is. And that constantly changes. So here's an example, right? Like I have the GFX 100, which is the 100 megapixel medium format mirrorless camera. It's awesome, right? Like who doesn't want to shoot with that? I don't.
Beast.
Like if a client's like, we need to hundreds of photos and 20 hero shots and everything, I'm not shooting it with that camera. I'm going to pick either the GFX 50, or if that's too slow, I'm going to pick something else, because I don't want to do like that high res work. And similarly, I would say, like if somebody said we need some dynamic animal shots and we're going to be in a safari Jeep, I'd probably go with the new Sony stuff, because it's super fast. You got all the lenses there. It's all sharp and telephoto. It's be 42 megapixel or higher. I don't know Sony that well. That's Albert's department, but it means you can punch in a little bit. Drones are another thing. I mean, I'd rather just be able to be ninja with the Mavic 2 Pro, but sometimes I'll just have the companies rent an Inspire 2 so we can actually shoot with something more substantial. It really depends on what we're trying to capture and what the output is. And that's a big thing, for social media and online stuff. I passed iPhone video for regular 4K video on projects before, and people haven't noticed. It's really just what you're comfortable with. And getting into photography, what's becoming more difficult now, especially with COVID, is getting hands-on with something. And that's really what you need to do. Basically, every company is creating a comparable camera that will get the job done. As long as you find the settings, 4K 60, 120, those little things that you need. It's really about how it feels. And I think that's what turned me onto Fujifilm initially. I started using Fujifilm in 2012 and 13, when mirrorless cameras were like a cute idea. You're like, oh yeah, this thing's so cute, and maybe someday it'll be worth something. And then everything's revolution of mirrorless now. But it was because the ergonomics were nice. I liked the feel of it. The Nikon cameras for me were just like a tool. It's like I have a chef's knife. I love cooking. That's a tool. I don't like, I'm not into the like buying the knife that has all these little custom, you know what I mean? It got the job done. Nikon was a tool. I set it up. Albert knows we just put it on F8, hit the auto button, and it got everything done. And then Fujifilm was, wow, this thing looks kind of retro. It's got a legacy of design. It's fun to shoot with. The community's nice. So that's how that evolved. But I'm constantly changing with the technology. And that's and then that's with photos and videos. Like moments in time, we shoot moments in time. All with Fujifilm. So we were one of the first people to shoot an entire show with Fujifilm. And that was because we wanted to try it, and it worked out really well. But if we're going to do something, if somebody wants us to create another show like that, and it's funded and sponsored, we'll use whatever the crew's going to use. Are we going to use Alexa cams? Are we going to use the new Sony? I want to make sure that they're using what they're comfortable with. So it's constantly evolving. And the one thing I'll say is all of us can recommend cameras if you need cameras recommend. You kind of have to have a budget and intention in mind, but just be careful if somebody online tells you this is the best camera you could buy and nothing else is like it. Because these days, a lot of people are sponsored, and that's fine, but every camera can do the job. I mean, what I shoot with the most right now is my iPhone. You know, I do have some 100 megapixel shots of my daughter. She's like archival proof. She's future proof.
Of course.
But the iPhone, man, it's there. It's in my pocket. I think Albert's shooting with the new Sony phone. He can talk about. It's incredible what this thing does. You know, so don't
Yeah,
don't get too stuck in the gear. You know.
Yeah, I find it always very interesting topic as well. And I occasionally actually post on my Instagram and social media channels. I post like a phone shot, you know, and people, they, especially on Instagram, no one notices, you know, that it's a phone shot because we're looking at its small format. And I think gear is overrated nowadays because these days, like Elia said, every camera can make a decent shot. It's all about you. You know, it's about the composition, the light, how you handle your camera. And like Elia said, a camera is just a tool. You know, any brand nowadays has a great camera. And there's so many like kind of gear talk and also like a war. People are, some people are very, you know, they go against each other on Facebook or social media or whatever, you know, which camera is better. But in the end, it doesn't matter. You know, you can take a good picture with any camera. Like 5-10 years ago, people took the pictures with a 10 megapixel camera. You know, it doesn't matter. The picture can still be timeless with an old camera. It really
and that's true,
matter.
Albert. The other thing that we get questions about all the time, and that's what's difficult, is what to buy when you're getting into photography, and that's a hard question to answer.
That's the nugget right there.
And we have like more cameras that can do all these amazing things. For us, it opens up all these possibilities, but it also creates confusion in the beginner market because you have all these options and so much competing information out there saying you need this instead of this instead of this.
And everyone has an opinion. You hit it, Elia. You hit it right on the head with you know, some photographers are sponsored, therefore there's a profit motive to recommend a certain gear, or even a contractual motive to not talk about other gear that may be superior to what they're using. Bastian, I want to have you dive in here as well. So that with the, you know, when I look at your work, I think, okay, the gear that you use needs to work all the time, right? It needs to be repeatable. You can't be thinking about, okay, where's this menu item thing or whatever.
Shock proof.
Notwithstanding you being
I think that's important. Yeah, like weatherproof, you know, weatherproof.
Weatherproof. So what do you look at when what do you like? Chime in on the discussion. Is gear, like when you think about gear, are you just like Elia said, f-stop, shutter speed, ISO, whatever, I can work with anything you throw at me, or does it have to be a specific type of kit?
No, I can work with everything. So there are also some shots in my feed I actually shot with such a small Sony hand photography camera, because actually I was at my girlfriend's house and I looked out the window and I thought it would be just raining, and there was a huge double rainbow. The whole scanner was going down the street running, because luckily Germany is beautiful. So I was running to the old town and took shots of the rainbow with a panoramic shot with a small camera, and it's one of my best shots from this year on Instagram. So actually you can compare it when you are there and traveling some foreign countries and you go to those small street food stores and you get like, wow, it's such an amazing food and it's cooked on the really old pans and it's all dirty there, but it just works out. And otherwise I was in a hotel today and they got really big kitchen with stuff inside, but the food wasn't tasty. And that's what I want to say. It's not about the gear, it's about the passion and the idea behind it. So actually, the most important thing I would say for beginners is to get yourself a camera which can do, like Elia said, ISO, f-stop, exposure time, without any much stuff around. There are so many stuff on today's cameras, and I just hate it. Also, those cameras with touchscreen, you get everything with touchscreen and not with buttons. Like when you're out there shooting Aurora at -20 degrees, try to use a touchscreen with your hand gloves on. It doesn't work. So just the buttons with everything on it. And the first thing when I get the camera is to turn off everything except how I use ISO, exposure time. That's in the end, that makes the image. Everything else just distracts you from that.
Yeah, no, for sure. You know, that's a good segue into just, you know, there's the people that have unlimited budgets or high budgets for gear, and they can say, you know what, I want that GFX 100. I don't care. Just give me the best of the best, and then I'll figure out how to use it on the back end. And then there are the, I call them it's not even age related. I was going to say young and scrappy, but just scrappy photographers that are just
Yes.
entering into photography, and they can, they get what they can get and do this ridiculous, outstanding work
Yes.
with next to
Yeah.
nothing, with an old, computer from 1980 and one
Absolutely.
lens and all this. They just weave miracles. Albert, how important is that stuff? I'm leading the question here, but the importance of learning the art and the science of light and photography and the physics and all that stuff behind the scenes before you obsess over, which camera and which whiz bang and which brand and, should I be influenced by Facebook people telling me I should buy Nikon, Panasonic, Sony, Olympus, blah, blah, blah. What do you think about that? Should they build a foundation?
I think it's important, but I think the most important thing is just like go out and shoot. A lot of people, I teach a lot, and a lot of people, they overthink things. They spend hours and hours online researching on like how to do this, how to do that. But, just go out and shoot. I taught myself photography. I've never done any school for it. But I go out, I shoot, and when I have a problem, I Google it. That's how I approach everything in life, basically. And so it's best to just practice. But of course, it's great to watch. There's so many resources online from photographers you admire, tutorials or YouTube, whatever. There's a lot of inspiration and fun things to watch. But the most important thing is to go out and shoot. Don't care that much about the gear, but also, like you're talking about the foundation. I do think it's extremely important to have some knowledge about that. But when I go out and shoot, you start to learn it automatically. So you approach a scene and you think, oh, when the sun sets, the light is this. 1 hour before sunset, the last light hits the hills like this. Everything looks gold. 1 hour before it's night, I get this beautiful blue hour. It's great for shooting cityscapes. All these things, you can read about them, but when you're in the field and shooting, you automatically think, oh, this happens when I do this. This happens when the light does this. When I shoot a sunset, when I have high clouds and no low clouds and the sun peaks below, I know that I'm going to get color. It's all from experience. And then you start to check, then I can read like Bastian, I can read weather models because weather models show how the clouds are going to be. Then I need to check if I get high clouds and no mid clouds and no low, then I can get a good sunset. But it's all from experience in the field that I think like, okay, then I need to look for this or this online to do research on this so that I can get in the field a better result. But it all comes down to practice, and see what you're good at and what you're not good at. And of course, asking advice from people like us, probably. I get questions all the time. Hey, can you quickly give a comment on my new shot? I have no problem doing that, of course. And it's very like composition, knowing the light is extremely important. And most of the times nowadays, I see a lot of people, they can take quite good pictures, but a picture can be so much better by composition. It's like so many people forget about the composition in the field. I always also Bastian knows all about it. When you see some amazing epic storm, tornado, I want to see not only the tornado, I want to the best thing is to have an even better picture with composition, foreground elements, maybe some house to show the scale of the tornado, stuff like this gives the picture just a little bit of extra. So long story, but I hope.
No, that's good.
Well, you did hit on something actually, because that's what we do see. I think in the past years when I ran a lot of photo tours and things like that, we get people internationally, and sometimes there's been this mentality: people actually show up on day one and they've bought $30,000 to $40,000 of gear, but they haven't even read the manual. Like, okay, now I'm going to use this stuff. So there seems to be an uneven distribution of investment in cameras and the technology rather than the education. So you kind of have to do both, right? Trial by fire is my favorite way. I'm self-taught almost everything I do. I Google just like Albert does, and we learn a lot from each other. That's another thing. But it's really important to do both. You need to get out there, and then you also need to fill in those knowledge gaps in between. That's the fastest way you can do it. And I think that what I tell people with photography, if you become obsessed with it, it becomes a passion, then you know you're on the right track. So as long as you're enjoying the way that you're shooting, you're enjoying what you're doing and enjoying learning, you're on the right path. If you're not, tweak it a little bit, because like Albert said, you're going to be out there, you're going to start shooting, and then you're going to be like, oh man, you know, this went wrong or this went wrong. And how do I improve this little thing? And those little things that you learn, while they seem like there's a lot of things to learn in photography, there really aren't. You just intuitively know which ones to apply in the field, and it becomes an intuitive process rather than a technical process. But just like anything else, you got to get out there. If you want to play guitar, you got to try it every day for a little while. Piano, it's the same thing. It's just that photography seems more accessible to us because it is. And that's where people kind of, there's a mentality where, oh, this will be easy. You know, I'm just going to go with it. But if you really want to get good, is go out there, shoot as much as you can, like Albert says, Google what you're trying to figure out, and definitely start getting some tutorials and doing the reading. That will improve you really fast. And if you can hang around other photographers, that's great too. You'll always learn from other people as well.
From my workshops and from my traveling, I know there are some interesting stories. There are two types of photographers. There's those photographers coming to your course with a 10 years old DSLR camera, and the other one, like you said, with a $20,000 equipment. And there's a big difference between those photographers. The one with the old camera just have one lens and one camera, which is so old he doesn't care about if it gets dirty or if it breaks. And I was shooting in the Bavarian Alps. It's called Clam. It's like Grand Canyon, just smaller with much water inside. And one of those high-equipped photographers was like, "Oh no, I don't want to shoot there. My camera gets dirty. I can't change my monofocal lens because it's so dirty in there." And the other guy was like, "Hang on, I will just put my tripod over down the bridge and just shoot down there and make a picture of it," and it was a great perspective. So just don't worry about the gear. Get an old DSLR camera. You just don't care about if it breaks. You can go there to the seascapes and it's getting completely underwater, and you don't care about. That's how we learn to shoot. If you always care about your $20,000 camera, you can't take great pictures.
Yeah, like when you get a new phone and you cover it with the case and everything, and you're like, "Oh man, I don't want to get a scratch on it." Then after a few weeks, you're like, "I don't care." You know, you have to.
Well, you know, when I get a new camera, it's on the pillow next to me at night. Yeah. You know, I got the manual in the nightstand and the pillow or the camera right over there. You know, it's interesting. I spent several years in the United States Air Force as a combat photojournalist, and one of the things that they teach you in there is that your shutter finger, you know, kind of to boil down what you said, Elia, your shutter finger on the camera, think of it as having about 100,000 bad photos stuffed in there. And the only way to get them out is to press the shutter. So you have to keep shooting. And it's only until they're all out of there can you start making good photographs.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, your failure rate, right? You have to keep trying and you're not going to succeed. You got to learn. That's how you learn.
Signal to noise. Folks in the chat are wanting us to talk more about landscape, which we will. I just put a message in there. We're going to be talking about the software, obviously, Luminar, et cetera, AI, post-processing, your workflows, and all that stuff. So, yeah, like I said, this is a fireside chat centered around sort of landscape photography. These guys, what they do, and just, you know, sort of shooting the breeze about photography in an unstructured sort of way. So, hopefully you guys will get something out of this. I wanted to end this part about gear with a little bit of discussion. You can't talk about photography gear without diving into iPhone and mobile a little bit, right? Because the iPhone, like you said, Elia, a lot of your work is, or that you shoot, most of the photos you shoot, maybe not the commercial work, but is on the iPhone. Mine too. It's with me all the time. Best camera is the one you have with you. But we're on the verge of getting another iPhone. The next release, the iPhone 12, is on the horizon. I wanted to put it out to you guys. I'm making the assumption that you're on the iOS platform, but smartphones in general, what's missing? Like these things can do a lot of
Well,
stuff right now that I didn't think was
I think
possible just 5 years ago.
I think they can do so much things, actually, mostly much more than our professional cameras. Sometimes I wish that they had the AI systems that they have in the smartphone, that they would have it just in the cameras.
Why
Would be
not?
crazy.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think the main problem from the smartphones is the sensor. The sensor is still too small to get a good quality image, especially in low light, handheld. The sensors are just so small, so the quality can never match our professional cameras. And
there's also, though, Albert, you'll agree with this, is the problem with this is it's connected to Instagram. When you have a camera, you're focusing on the landscape, you're out there shooting, but when you're shooting with this, you're also checking your messages, posting, and all that kind of stuff. You have to detach yourself from technology sometimes as a landscape photographer. You have to be comfortable with doing that. It's the only way that you're going to be connecting with the environment. So I love the technology in these, but I hate them for when they take people away. I'll be on the shooting the Rialto in Venice. It's the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen. People are like, oh, it's so beautiful like that. And then they turn around and start posting to Instagram when they just shot. I'm like, this is a big, big problem. And it's pulling us away from being able to immerse ourselves in landscapes. So that's something I wanted to put out there. It's sort of the reverse of it,
Yeah, it takes you out of the moment. But on the other side, like Albert, you were saying, the sensor, it's a tiny little sensor. But the other side of that is, we'll segue into AI in a minute, is the computational photography side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've been scratching my head for years about why these big camera manufacturers haven't created an app ecosystem for these cameras and incorporated computational photography, following Apple and Google's lead, with how they're packing stuff that happens after the point of capture in that millisecond before you even see it. How come we don't have that? Why are we still just direct pixel to pixel type experiences? What do you guys think about that? Why don't you take that? What do you
are
think
processing well, yeah. I mean, if you think about iPhone 2, the big billboards were shot on iPhone. Your iPhone is doing so much processing to the image already. And that's really like the secret sauce of the iPhone, is the sharpening, the color enhancement, all these things. Portrait mode is depth maps. That's an intuitive system. It's not quite AI, but it is a learning based technology that they keep applying changes to. But it's I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this. I think that people kind of don't understand how much their camera is actually doing to the images. So even if you're shooting with Nikon, Canon, Sony, Fujifilm, whatever, your raw file might come out as a raw file, but those JPEGs are processed. They're all basically compressed the same way, but they're all processed. And I think that's the disconnect, is we don't know how much it's actually doing for us. And do we want that level of control?
Yeah.
Actually,
do you want to hand that away? Because that's back in the whole RAW versus JPEG controversy days. Remember those? That was the that was the whole thing. Do you want the ingredients for the photo? You want the ingredients, or do you want the final baked cake? And when I think of JPEG processing, or like you said, Elia, what happens after the point of capture in a camera before you see it on the LCD? I always think of a room of really smart Japanese guys at one of those companies making decisions about my image and then showing it to me. Versus,
I've been at those tables. Me too. And it's funny, Bastian saying like, I don't want anything dangling off my camera. Why is there a 30-second limit on these cameras? It's because they sell an adapter. Why isn't GPS in the camera? Because they sell an adapter. These are decisions that they can make in firmware change. But you do have, back to that RAW and JPEG thing, is if you automate everything, you're going to have one side of the aisle is going to be like, I don't want to automate it. I don't want it automated. That's not photography anymore. That's not a manual procedure. But then people like me, I'm like, man, I don't mind doing this in Photoshop for 3 hours, but if I can do it with the click of a button, I'm pretty happy. And I've been using Photoshop since 1998, 1999. So I've definitely done enough of it, but I would rather something mask something for me. I have no problem handing that off to the AI system if it can handle it. And I think we're at a point now where it used to be kind of cute with Photoshop content aware. We call it content aware fail, because it was just a comical result. Everything, would happen. But now, I'm in any of the auto buttons, like even Adobe Lightroom, I click auto and I'm like, wow, it's actually pretty good. We're at that point. And I think that
have it for video. It's crazy.
Yeah, the whole rotoscoping, auto-rotoscoping. We're at a point where it's actually entering into production level quality. And that's an exciting time to be, because it's been around for a while, but it hasn't necessarily functioned the way that it does now.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, it's a scary time. It's a scary time and an interesting time, and that's a good segue into just a discussion about AI in
Yeah.
general. You know,
Be
there's
nice to the robots.
be nice to be nice to your overlords. But that's interesting because it's almost a split mindset from a lot of photographers. On the one side, it's like, and this goes back to the beginning of time, to like the Gutenberg press. Only real writers write with a quill pen. So and now you fast forward to today, and we have the photographer, the camp that says AI, you're not a real photographer if you're letting an algorithm make decisions on your image for you. You're taken away from the artisanship of photography, yada yada yada. Then the other side is, this is the way forward. This is reducing the drudgery and all the other stuff that you don't want to spend time on, and letting you get back to the thing that's really important to you, which is storytelling. You still giving you control over the final image, but removing a lot of those steps in between. I want to throw it out to you guys, and then we'll segue this into discussion on your workflows with Luminar, which uses AI in a lot of its processing. Bastian, I want to have you chime in there. So, looking at it through that lens, AI versus non-AI in your workflow, are you a full-on, just give me the pixels, man, and let me figure out what I want to do with them with a cup of coffee in front of the computer? Or are you okay with a robot sitting over your shoulder helping you out? What do you think?
I think you have to draw another line. It's not actually about if you use AI or use it not. It's more about if you still want to call it photography after the processing. So I think you have to draw a line if it's pixel art or if it's still photography, because photography means painting with light. So actually, if the whole image is made in a computer, you get a beautiful image and it's absolutely okay. But for me, as a more documentary nature photographer, you have to draw this line. And I'm ready to use artificial intelligence on my image, but it must be still a true image. So yeah. I need to draw this line. And yeah, there are some really beautiful compositions out there on Instagram and artists who work there, but I don't like this line between I'm saying I'm a photographer and all my composition is made on the computer. And that's the point I would say, it's not the photographer anymore. And this is a lie, because as a normal photographer, you can't compete with those people because they are creating things that are from the computer, and they are so good because maybe also of the AI that you can't differentiate between a real image and a pixel art anymore.
You got to think about it this way too. There's a point that I like to make is any amount of AI enhancement tools are not going to fix a bad photo. And that's where I think a lot of people go wrong thinking about this AI, is we're using it to enhance what's already there. You still have to create, compose, and think about light and make an interesting photo. I mean, if you see a lot of that stuff, like, here's my backyard and I just processed it. And it's like, you got to go back to like the fact that your backyard sucks, man. Like, you need to go somewhere cool. And then you start using these tools. And I think that that's where, if you start thinking about it that way, then it doesn't take away from the art form. You're not thinking, this is all done in AI, it made all the decisions for me. You still made all the decisions. What you're doing is just kind of automating some of the technical end to achieve your look at the end. It's like putting that little bit on the end.
Yeah. It's like if you do 15 things every time you import an image, repetitiously every time, and then you're able to get rid of that repetition and start where you want to start. Is that a bad thing? Kind of like paddle shifters in a car, right? They do the shifting faster for you. You're still shifting, but it's a lot of stuff is happening behind the scenes when you hit that paddle. Yeah, it's interesting.
You
Albert,
got some good analogies.
Yeah, it is. It's just shifting versus manual. And you'll never, unless you're a NASCAR driver or a professional driver, you will never be able to shift as fast as the computer can shift, or as efficiently.
If we can compare, for example, I use the tools are just tools to me, all the software. So often people asking me, hey, Albert, what do you use to edit your pictures? Doesn't matter. You can use any you can use Microsoft Paint basically to edit your picture. But it doesn't matter. It's all about your vision, what you want to show to the viewer. You can use any tool for that. That's around there, and some tools they're maybe easier to use than others, what you want to achieve. And also think of this, that Elia has been using Photoshop from 98, 99, but we used to do everything manually. Now as well, luminosity masking, it's very popular. I use it a lot in my workflow. Luminosity mask in Photoshop, great control. But think about, if you, Luminar has, for example, advanced contrast. You can add contrast in the midtones. You can add contrast in the highlights. You can add contrast in the very dark tones. That's basically exactly the same as a luminosity mask, but much easier. So I like this module a lot because it can do very quickly what I want to do. So in my head, I already know what I want to do. And then I think, okay, am I going to use a Photoshop luminosity mask for it and spend 5 minutes on it? Or do I just open Luminar and spend 10 seconds on using the slider and get the same result? So it's all about the vision. And if AI or if a certain software makes this easier, then what's the problem of using it and getting the same result?
And Albert, you're not like just opening an image and going better or worse or better or worse or better for worse. I think when we're beginners, we're thinking about that. Yeah, Albert's like, I need this to be a little bit more warm in the midtones, or I want the horizon, orange to fade into the red a little bit more. And that's like, are we going to create a mask, or are we going to go into Luminar and just tweak a few sliders to get the same effect? And that's the key to this, and the confusing part when you're getting into it is there are 97 and a half ways to do every single thing, especially in Photoshop. And luminosity masking is great. It's not an entire workflow. It doesn't need to be. You've just complicated your life. And I think that just because something is simplified doesn't make it inferior. And just because something is complicated doesn't make it better. And it's it's hard. I understand right now, if you go to YouTube and go, how do I make my images better? There's going to be a lot of really bad results out there, but there are clear paths to it. And Albert's the same way as me. It's like, we know how to do it, right? But we'd rather take the simple way because it allows us to work on more of our photos. You get the result that you want faster, more gratification, but you're coming to it from a place where, hey, I recognize these are the things that I want to do with an image. And that all goes back to the amount of practice. You gotta look at these images for a long time.
Often we already, in the field, we already know what to do. We see it on the display and we already know how it's going to look after post-processing. When I shoot an image, sometimes in the blue hour of the moon, for example, sometimes I just use a single shot. It's very underexposed, but I see in the histogram, I can already recover everything. And I already know that in my post-processing, it's going to look good. I know that what I have to do, and that's already how I'm shooting in the field. When I'm teaching photo editing, I always say, exactly like you said, Elia, like we're not going to just use some sliders. We have a vision. We look at our image and we see what do we want our result to be? Do we want it to have a dark mood, or do we want it to be dreamy? We're going to look at our distracting elements. What do we want to remove? Where do we want to add some light? Maybe some dodging and burning. Maybe I have to adjust the color a little bit. Basically, I'm going to write down, doing it in my head, but you can write it down what you want to do. And then you're going to use the software to do your edit and see if you can actually get the result that's in your head. And that is very important. And that is also one of the most difficult things in post-processing, is to do that, to get that image that's in your head on the screen. And that's one of the most difficult things to do. And there's so much software out there, and all the software has their own advantages and disadvantages. And by learning software and by learning not only software, also color and just basic techniques that work the same in every software, you basically you start to see the powers of certain kind of software and what is good for which part of your photo. Because for myself, I use Luminar, but I don't only use Luminar. I use a lot of different things because I know that Luminar has very powerful features, but for some things of my images, I use different software. Why? Because they're simply better for that part of my image, So
it comes down to workflow. And Albert and I teach the same way as we're teaching workflow. We're not teaching what every button in the software does or whatever slider does. It's like this is a problem that we're trying to solve, and this is the tool that we use. And I think that that's a good place to start with people. And it was my frustration with photography education back in 2014, 2015, when we created Photographing the World. Was literally, when you search on YouTube, I was confused. Like a 10-minute tutorial about like frequency separation for a landscape image. I'm like, what is this? Let's simplify this. Like, I want someone to be able to buy a camera, go out into the field, learn how to shoot, and get better photos from day one. And that's where a lot of these tools come in. Does it mean you're going to always use these sliders for it? No, you're going to find other things that you like. You're going to find other workflows. But I think that these give us the result that we're looking for, and they do it quickly. And it's hard these days. It's intimidating in the beginning, but it's not that difficult. You just kind of have to stick to it, and don't think that the AI tools, people are kind of afraid, the film versus digital thing, like you were saying, Frederick. It's like, that's no longer photography. People are just going to be able to magically have a good image. That's absolutely not true. If you think about those tools in the hands of an artist versus in the hands of a beginner, it's only going to enhance what you're able to do. It's going to be able to maybe take it to that next level, but it doesn't mean that it's fully automated and you don't have to think for yourself anymore. These are tools for artists. And I think that there's a lot of excitement in that. I think both sides of the aisle should be excited, because this means like more great tools for us to use.
Yeah, I just wish there wasn't an aisle, right? Because it's just like
I know.
with two sides. Because I look at it, you guys, if you remember a photographer or a company in the 80s called Kai's Power Tools. You remember that?
Yes.
Way back then?
I know it. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you remember before Kai's Power Tools, or around that time, this was Photoshop 2 or something in that if you look at the Photoshop timeline. But he used to publish on the internet at the time these recipes for doing things. I forget what he called them, Kai's Power Tips or something like that. And
Kai's Power Goo was there.
Yeah, this is in that era with KPT Bryce and all that. And he used to publish these long step-by-step recipes on how to make metal textures, how to make something look like glass and all that. And it was like 30 steps. Do this, make an alpha channel, make a mask, cut the mask, all these different things. And now we can do that in 2 seconds with filters. When I think about AI, I think about that list of things. And I look at it from 2 different perspectives. I look at that list of how I used to say, I want to make glass, and I would sit down for an hour making something look like glass. But then after I did it, I like, wow, I did it. That looks fantastic. And now I understand how to do that, right? And I would apply those masking techniques to other things. And so there's that joy, that sort of building a ship in the bottle joy that some people enjoy. And then there are the people, they're like, you know what, screw all that. I just want glass because I need glass in my final image.
And you need to learn it. That's the thing. Like, it's not going to solve all the problems. Like, if I'm using the AI tools, it's going to solve some of them, but not all of them. We're still having to go back in and do it manually too.
I think the most important thing is that you also try to integrate those tools in your head, because normally when I, and probably you two also, are out there for shooting, or you three, sorry, Frederick,
hey, I'm here.
Yes. So I mean, you all three. You probably shoot an image and already think about the workflow we have later on. So the most important thing is that you know how to use your tools. It's probably better for beginners to focus on easy tools and to have the first experience with filters. And that's a good place for AI, because you get really nice results and you can see what happens in the picture. And if you're ready, you can get more control of your image and go more into the details. But the most important thing is to already know your software you are developing your raw files out of.
Yeah, Steve in the chat says, he said, I like to get the vision right and then the rest will come. I want to talk about that a little bit before we talk about workflow. And by the way, we're coming up on the top of the hour here. Hopefully you guys just stick around for a little bit longer. And just folks that are watching this, we got quite a number of people watching this. If you can stay, great, and interact with us. But again, this will be recorded and published a little bit later. So there's that. So on the vision side, Albert, I want to start with you. I'll throw it to you first. Which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? And this is without client interaction, right? Because if you have a client and they say, hey, I need a picture of X, Y, and Z, it needs to look like this, and these are the colors. You have a directive, you're the professional, you execute on it. But if you're doing a self project and you're just learning, there's the one side, again, these two sides. There's the one side of, hey, learn all these different techniques and tips and understand the math and the Photoshop and Luminar, and you understand everything, and then go build something great from what you learned. Or do you approach it from the other side where you're like, you know what? I want to make a shot that looks like this. I want this. I want it in this location. Or if it's a composite, I want a balloon in the sky, and I want an orange beach and a red tree. And okay, now how do I make that? And then you figure out the tools that you need in order to execute on your vision. So should it be vision first, or should it be education then vision? What do you think?
Wow, very difficult question, actually. No, I think vision is, for me, the most important. I mean, I'm a very creative person, so for me, I always have, not only in photography, I have so many ideas and things I want to realize, and then I start to actually research how to do it. So for me, it's definitely the vision. I get inspired a lot as well by so many things around me, and now especially with social media. I like social media. I like browsing my Instagram. Just every day I just browse my feed a little bit, and sometimes I see things and I'm like, wow, that's amazing, and I get ideas and new visions. And that's where I start from. So I see a nice location, then I think, oh, can I do this at the location? Can I maybe shoot some amazing Milky Way? Or how's the sun going to be? I'm going to check all the research, all the planning, and then I'm going to see if what is in my head is possible, or if it's something that I can explore an idea of, or if I can go there. Vision always first for me.
Elia, what about you? Is it vision? And you're speaks, obviously there's a ton of accomplished professional photographers that are watching this right now, but for the people that are not at that level, they're still learning, they want to create world-class work. Should they begin with a self-project that, with an idea and then execute that idea? Like Gene in the chat says, he sketches down and write down what he's, and then he applies a workflow to that. Should you start with that, or should you start with just getting good?
One more very small thing before Elia answers. I also think that everything you learn on the way, it's extremely useful as well in generating new ideas. So if you have a lot of knowledge gathered, then like you also have new ideas, like, oh, I know how to do all this. And then I start to see new things, basically, that I can, I know how to do exposure stacking, noise stacking, focus stacking. So in the field, I also get many new ideas, like, oh, I can actually make this whole shot by using all my techniques. So also it helps both ways. So I think that's also, for me, that's very important.
The more I'm in this, the more I realize that it has to be both. And my creative vision can be very strong, almost that I'm determined to get something a certain way, and it'll often make me overlook things that are equally good or better. And I think that we can get too stuck in trying to, achieve a specific result, excuse me, that we overlook all of these other beautiful things. And that goes for when you're scouting a location, maybe you're on 500px or Flickr and you're like, I want this one spot, but there are so many other spots. That's just one example. But me, I'm like, and Albert's the same way. It's like with the Milky Way, he has to be here and this has to be right. But there might be a better way to do it. So you have to kind of get in there. And what I do is I'm like, all right, I know when I go to this location, I'm going to be able to achieve this, this, and this. But I plan in that there's probably going to be 5 or 6 things that I'm going to figure out. And it's the same thing with clients when you're dealing with this type of work and you're trying to like basically landscape photo a whole area, a whole state, a whole country, and things like that. Often the best photographs are not going to be documented. So we have to dig and research, and Naomi's amazing at that. Like she's doing this right now for North Carolina. And it's interesting because we'll sort of dig in and find like these little images, try to figure out where they are. And they're like, okay, we know that if we're in this area, we're going to be able to go to this waterfall and we're going to be able to get these hero shots for the client. But then there's all these other hikes that might do that. Well, I just told you Naomi's better at it than I am. But it's like you have a vision of what you can achieve. You have your target of what you need to achieve. And this goes for clients or no clients. And then you have to spend your time experimenting. And often it's when you're experimenting without too much of an agenda, where, like Albert said, that's where you're learning all these new ideas. Like, I didn't even know I could do it this way. I never thought about using this. And so you kind of have to apply both. And that's sort of what I learned. And I find, like, you know, to embrace the random now, I have much better, not only a much better result, but I have a much better time, man, because I'll stress myself out. I'll be like, oh God, you know, I got to get this perfect. And the Polaris has to be right in the center. Like that shot in Mount Bromo that I have, you guys look it up, it was the first Star Trail shot in Mount Bromo. And I obsessed over that and spent all the time and just got that one shot because this is all I wanted. I planned it for months. And I'm like, man, I should have just like gone out and done other things there. You know, there are other ways around. You gotta let yourself make mistakes by experimenting, and you got to experiment in order to learn something different or learn things in a new way.
Sometimes you get the best shots when you already, sometimes you get the best shots when you're already done with the shot you want, you know, because then you're free.
Well, I just take your shots anyway. You know that. Every time you're sleeping, I just take a couple off the card.
You guys are just backing each other's ideas up. That's
no, but I'm definitely interested also in Bastian, because he's a storm chaser. This is much more difficult. You know, what you really plan all that, like seeing the tornado, or you just see what's going to happen and go with it on the fly?
Yeah.
And the problem is actually when you normally go storm chasing in the Midwest of the USA, there's nothing much to shoot. It's just corn and wheat fields, and you are likely to find anything for the foreground. So it's much more difficult to go storm chase in Europe because it's much traffic everywhere. You know, when you drive in Dutch, I normally want to give me a headshot because, I don't know, it's everywhere. It's Autobahn, but everything is just stuck in the traffic. And so, yeah, but you can find much more nicely foregrounds in Europe, and I have a really, really huge Google Maps map where I've put all those little spots where I can drive from the Autobahn to take a shoot for the foreground. And yeah, actually, it's really much spontaneous. Like, oh my God, there's some flowers on the side of the street. I go down there and shoot the storm over it, and then we get a beautiful picture. So actually, like you said, it's a combination from going out there and shooting the big places, and then you look around and try to find all the small compositions around those big places.
But Bastian, is there like like you're a storm chaser? You have a lot of amazing storm shots. But is there like some kind of list you have? Like, oh, I want to shoot like this kind of shelf cloud, and I want this kind of tornado, and I want the tornado with lightning with the shelf cloud. You know, is there anything like you strive for, or you just think, oh, I will see what kind of storm we get, and I will work with that? Or how does that work?
Actually, I got this list in my brain, but it's somewhere really behind all the normal things I'm thinking about storm chasing, because it's so uncontrollable, absolutely unrealistic to get those shots. So you have to really work with what you get in those moments.
You know, the segue for this, and I want to dive into this now that we're at the hour, and we'll push into this a little bit more. So workflow, you know, and looking at how you guys are applying software once you're out there, and you know, you use, like Elia was saying, sort of programmed serendipity. You know, you get the shot, and then you play around, and you get other shots around that, right? And so after you have the pixels on the memory card and you're back at the computer, Elia, I'll throw it at you first, man. What do you do? Like, what's your photography stack? Is it Photoshop, then Luminar, or is Lightroom in there? Like, how do you get the images that you publish?
Well, I mean, I have a bad habit of not looking at things for a couple of years. So I got like 10 years of archives. So if they make it into Lightroom, that's good. That's the first thing, because I go through and I catalog everything. Like Albert, I already kind of know if there's something I'm working on that needs to be quick, I might just go and pull those hero shots that I need before I sort of process the auxiliary shots. And then there's basic editing in Adobe Lightroom. You know, I'm just kind of pushing and pulling shadows and balancing the image. And then from there, it goes right into Photoshop. And Photoshop, where I'm doing all the masking, object removal, object mitigation, things like that, color mitigation. Mm-hmm. And then after I do those things, which is like, you know, just object removal, cleaning. My cameras are always filthy. So like the dust on the sensors, you know, the people doing selfies in the background, all that kind of stuff. You know, then we start talking about the enhancement stuff, the AI stuff, the plugins and everything, sort of the fine tuning. But most of the heavy lifting of everything that I do is in Adobe Lightroom, and I'm shooting Fujifilm, and I'm telling everybody right now that it does a good job with the Fujifilm files. You know, I love Capture One. They're great people too. I use it. I teach it. I have to use it. I like it. But Lightroom does the job. Catalogs everything, and I'm able to move everything. And I think the key to the workflow that I'm using is a raw file based workflow, right? Like, we want to do all the heavy lifting in the raw. We want to adjust the shadows, the highlights, all of those things in the raw before we push it out into a 16-bit version into Photoshop. You know, that's where I'm always trying to do as much as I can with the power of the raw file before I start doing anything else to it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then the final output for the client, what is that?
It's usually TIFF.
JPEG?
TIFF, yeah. The standard is TIFF, and most people are using Adobe RGB. If it's a savvy client, you know, their magazine publication, they might have a specific thing. But yeah, usually it's the full res TIFFs. I keep them at 16-bit. I'm shooting it with a 16-bit camera now. But usually for print, it's like 8-bit Adobe RGB. Canon makes some great printers. The profiling is ProPhoto RGB, 16-bit. Mm-hmm. And then usually what I like to do is kind of do, I'll do all the finals as TIFFs, but then I'll create full res JPEGs for the client too in sRGB, and then also preview JPEGs. And what I'll do is I'll file reference those so that we're only working with the low res JPEGs for revisions, and then we don't have to open up the bigger files. But that's with the client work. With my work, it stays in Lightroom, goes to Photoshop, and it's a GFX 100. So you make one edit and it turns into a PSB. If you don't know what a PSB file is, you're very lucky. It means it's a PSD over 2 gigs. And then yes. I have different catalogs, but for my portfolio and all the print work and you know, my personal work, I have a master Lightroom catalog that all of those PSDs go into. And from that catalog, that's sort of where I generate all of the output, because it's easy to automate output from Lightroom.
Love it. Love it. Albert, what about you, man? Once you get back into the workstation, what software stack are you employing?
Yeah, actually, it's almost exactly the same, you know. So I use Lightroom as a main host. I know that actually Luminar, they also have a catalog function, but simply, you know, I've been using Lightroom for 10 years. So all my pictures are in the catalog, hundreds of thousands of pictures. And yeah, it just works very well with all the keywording. I can easily find my files. So I work as well, like same as Elia, I work from there. And then I use like Photoshop, or I use Luminar. I always use Luminar actually as a plugin, you know. What is also interesting to say is that when Luminar just came out, you know, before that, a long time ago, I was actually using color effects and stuff for certain kind of plugins. And after Luminar came out, Luminar actually doing a lot of the same things as that, but much more. So I started to use Luminar for all those things like this advanced contrast, split toning, advanced split toning, color modules, all these like Orton glow, all that kind of stuff, you know, is very good in Luminar. So I can, in Lightroom, I just use edit in, I go into Luminar, I do my stuff, I save, and it comes back into Lightroom, ready to export or categorize, to be categorized. And of course, if I need more control in certain things, I also use Photoshop a lot. So these 3 things I mainly use, and I often also open Luminar from Photoshop, actually, also as a plugin. I go into Luminar, I save everything, and then I can use Photoshop for a bit more, like I can mask certain things out, or I can remove them. Luminar also has a good masking function, actually, but I like to even have more control. So I do my stuff in Luminar, bring it back into Photoshop, then use the masking, and then, yeah, in the end, it's all back in my Lightroom to be in the catalog, ready for export. So yeah, these 3 things I use, actually. Yeah.
Albert, when do you do the sky replacement?
Never.
Oh, yeah, man. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that after. Bastian, give us your workflow as well, your post-processing workflow.
Yeah, actually, my post-processing workflow is in 2 parts. I got this part where I get the data right, because I studied image processing, so my brain is much about pixel data. And at first I like doing HDR, get the luminosity mask, and this is not creative. This is more like getting the data ready, like getting the perfect dynamic range for the whole image to have everything in, the depth and the highlights. And after that, the creative process starts. And also like the other two, I get much done in Lightroom. And after that, I go to Photoshop. And in Lightroom, I just process the raw file. Then maybe in Photoshop, I will get HDR, work with luminosity masks. Then maybe get back to Lightroom. But then in Photoshop, I use different plugins also. Of course, a Luminar plugin to have specific filters, because I have much sky in my image, and I also search for good contrast filters which work way around to have beautiful skies in the image, and therefore I only use it as a plugin. And I don't organize my image in Lightroom. It's probably because actually I studied image processing. I love to have all my files in the folders of Windows on my server, because I can go with my server to any computer. I can use Mac, I can use Windows, and I have the files stored and sorted. And I'm not used to one software. I can use it in any software, my personal catalog.
You know, I want to segue off of that into, and while we're on this next topic, I want to challenge you guys to pull up your individual sites and a favorite image in there, because I want to have each of you sort of walk through, you know, what the mindset was and how that shot came about. So while we're discussing this next topic, go ahead and pull those up in your browsers, and I'll have each of you screen share and walk us through it as we wrap up the interview, or wrap up the discussion. But on the topic of just sort of photography in general, we talked about gear at the beginning. We talked about post-processing. We talked about vision and all those sorts of things. I want to talk a little bit about the whys of photography. Now, Elia, or all of you guys on the commercial side, the why is the client, right? It's all about the client and what the client needs and making sure that those needs are met. But on the personal photography side, I wanted to get, now that I have you guys in the hot seat, it's a rare opportunity to talk to three accomplished professional photographers about this. So is it important for photographers in their personal work, do you think, to be shooting just sort of pretty shots? Or is there an opportunity, especially these days, to shoot sort of socially important shots, right? And create and tell socially important stories, not so much photojournalistically, taking shots of, you know, social unrest or those sorts of things, but even illustrative or composition, you know, photographic compositions. Should photographers be leaning into that? Elia, I'll throw it at you first. Should we be looking at, we as photographers, be creating shots that sort of speak about what we feel about what's going on in the world, whether it be politically, social, economically, you know, science or whatever? Should we pull from there, or should we just take pretty pictures and share those for the likes on Instagram? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I can answer this in different ways. I think that one of the main things that I always try to do when I go somewhere, it's just try to leave the place a little better than when you arrived. I definitely worked, just because of the style of my work being, you know, very iconic places. I tend to work in tourism a lot. And before COVID changed tourism, one of my biggest things that I was working on was trying to stop over tourism or destructive tourism. You know, and that's where we're just having a million people in the same place and it's destroying the ecosystem. And I was talking, actually in Japan, I was talking to a couple of the local leaders about how they can actually implement, you know, parking areas without destroying the natural landscape. So there's a conservational aspect of that. But I think as image makers, if we're trying to change the world or speak to a certain narrative or tell our truth, because that's really what we're always trying to do with photography, it really depends on that audience, right? Because if you're doing your own work, then it's an audience of one. But most people want to show their work in some level, whether that's a gallery, studio, or online. So if you want to get, you know, a bunch of likes on Instagram, take pretty pictures. That's it. You know, take the selfies in front of the waterfall. Do that. That will get you an Instagram audience, the selfies. But if you want to do impactful work, then start reaching out to these people at National Geographic who are doing that, start seeing how you can get involved. And I think that kind of work is driven based on the desire to make a difference rather than the desire of making a beautiful image. You're just sort of telling a truth. And I found with my work, when I started out, I was like, yeah, I'm going to blog about this and I'm going to change the world and all these things. And I tried with images and I did some things, but I actually pivoted into creating video content, like Moments in Time, because the end goal or the goal for that is to tackle some of these social issues. Because if I'm getting in there and taking photos, then I can talk to the locals. I can talk to everybody in Jakarta about the water table and how it's sinking. I can, we can go to the animal market and start working on that kind of stuff. We can go to Thailand and see how they're rescuing elephants. We can do that because photography is the vessel. And it's because I love being in the landscapes. I love photographing beautiful places. And I sort of came into this, how do I change these places? And that just that built the audience. Yeah, because it's a pretty picture, right, on Instagram. But I think that you have to have that heart fully in it before you even decide if this is something you want to do. If you're just doing social, economic, or environmental stuff just for the images, stop. That is not the reason to do it. And that's really where it comes to me, is the soul of your photography is the most important thing about what's motivating you to be out there. If right now you're like, I'm going to pick up a camera because I want 1 million followers on Instagram, please don't ever send me a message. I'm serious. I want people that are passionate. I want people who don't care about that, unless it's a vehicle to help get views on an issue. And that's really where I'm at now in my life and my career is I'm trying to take things on where I know it's going to help somebody or it's going to help something. That's really where I want everybody to think about, what is my motivation behind this and what is my audience, and is the audience more important than the work? Is the attention more important than the work? And if the answer is, then there are a lot of easier ways you can get followers on Instagram, but if you're really into it, you're you weren't a wartime photographer, but you're the Air Force, you were in there, you wanted to tell a story of this was, it's not like you're like, hey man, I'm just going to go photograph people on the battlefield. You wanted to make a difference. You wanted to tell real stories, and that's what brought you to that, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And, that's what we really have to think about. And that's what's going to sort of govern the laws of what we want to do with our lives photographically. That's my opinion.
I love it. I love it. That's perfect. Very well said. Albert, I want to throw it to you, man. What do you think the responsibility for photographers? Do they have a responsibility, to tell stories about what's going on in their little slice of being on the planet? Or is it, and there's no one right answer to this. Is it right to, just go take pictures of mushrooms and stuff that you like taking pictures of? Like, what do you think?
I think, well, it's hard to say that we have a responsibility. That you put a lot of burden on me by saying that. But but like, if I go back to your original question, why we take pictures, I think Elia already kind of said that, and for me it's the same. But the very most important thing is you shoot whatever you like. You're not gonna, sometimes maybe you get an assignment, and you shoot something that you maybe like a bit less. But before you get there, get into photography, you're not getting in photography, exactly like Eli said, to grow some big following, grow a big Instagram. No, you're shooting whatever you like. You're shooting because your passion is photography. And, this is the core for me. And from there, I start to see, with photography, I can do this and this and this. I can actually create a difference. I want to create a difference. Maybe some people, they don't want to get involved. That's okay. But for me, it's like the most important thing is your passion for photography. I've been doing this for 10 years, and I'm crazily addicted by photography. Still, when I see an amazing sunset in an amazing place, I go crazy. Elia, he knows about it. So
I've been there with you. Yeah.
I cannot control myself, and every time, this is just the passion, just shooting whatever you like. That is just so important, and having fun shooting photos and not shooting. I'm not even thinking about shooting for someone else or for something else. Yes. And the passion and the fun is the core and is the most important thing. I've seen quite some people actually. They get caught up on social media. They get a huge following very quickly, and then maybe after 2 years, their following is not good anymore, and they're like, I don't like photography anymore. And that's
Yeah, it's
not how it
pressure.
works. It's you're shooting for yourself mainly. You're not shooting for others. And now I used to shoot always this classic shots, amazing landscapes. Now I get more into the storytelling as well. Like when I go to Kyrgyzstan, I love to shoot these amazing mountains, amazing landscapes, but I take a portrait from time to time. I take a picture of a dog. I take a picture of like the different colors of shoes in front of a colorful house, just because I like it and I want to add some more volume to my photography and stories. I want to be more all-round photographer just because I like it, not for anything else. So
Love it.
yeah, and then of course I can tell more of a story with that. That comes later, but mainly I shoot it because I like it, simply because I like doing it, and I want to improve. I never stop learning. I join sometimes other seminars for completely different photography. Why? Because I like it. I want to shoot better macro, shoot better portrait. I just like photography. That's the most important thing.
And you're like
that's
learning
something every
the art and
photographer has in
science,
common. Is they all want to get better. Doesn't matter if you're a seasoned pro or a beginner. Everybody's trying to improve, and that's something we all share.
Practicing photographers versus professional, right? It's like practicing doctors.
It makes a better hobby, though. I'm just letting you know. Photography makes a better hobby because a hobby is a passion. That's where most of the successful people that you meet in photography, and that's where I've been lucky enough to speak at some of the National Geographic events alongside with those guys. And I mean, they're like, oh yeah, I wanted to go to East Africa for a couple months and tell a story, and then 7 years later I came back with like, oh wow, because they fell in love with it. There's that passion. I mean, that's what really drove the storytelling, and that's just so inspiring to me. And it's kind of like what I said about the cell phone, or they're not cell phones anymore. There's so much more disconnecting us from the audience sometimes, so that we can create our own work and our own vision. You can get a lot of wrapped up in things. It's not bad, but you do have to kind of come down to that foundation of what motivates you and the reasons that you're doing it. And I think with photography, since it is technical, sometimes it feels like it's not the same kind of art form as a painter or anything like that, but it can be. And it can also be life-changing. If a friend of mine, he does therapeutic sessions with people with depression, using photography as a tool to get them out and, to kind of overcome their agoraphobia. And I think that's an amazing thing. So it can be so much more if you let it. And I think that if you're going to invest this much time in something, because it does take, usually that Malcolm Gladwell, what did he say? Was it like 10,000 hours? Do you remember, Frederick? It's like a certain amount of time, 10 years of time it takes to master.
No, I think it was 10,000 hours. Yeah.
10,000 hours. Yeah. But 10,000 years. They sound like, I'm not going to mention
that's not going to happen.
We want to apply all this time, you want to love it. That's I think where the most inspiring photographers that I've met, I'm just like, I can't believe your dedication to it. Was the story, and then the camera was just there for him.
I love it. See, both of those answers from you and you and Albert were spot on and completely different. Like Albert's like, you know what? I just love photography. I want to shoot whatever I want to shoot. I don't want the encumbrance of having a social responsibility on top of it if I don't want to, but maybe I want to, and then I can do it if I want to, but it's up to me ultimately. Bastian, what about you? Where do you fall in there when it comes to what you should shoot or shouldn't shoot?
I think if you like or not, we are always on a small mission out there, because when it comes, we are nature photographer, landscape photographer. So when it comes to preserve all this nature in times of climate change, we are always on the mission, because we're out there and we are showing the people what is out there and how beautiful the world is. And so even if you don't like, we show people this beauty, what they normally don't see when they are just in their 9-to-5 jobs, chilling at home in the big cities. They don't see the nature like we are seeing the nature when we're out there. And so they were, wow, that's how it looks, and we have to preserve this. So even if we don't like, we're always doing this job.
Yeah, I agree. Perfect. Albert, you have a shout up you want to share with us that we can you can take us through why you created it? And
okay, let's see. Okay, I hope nothing weird is on my screen though.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay, can you see it?
Oh yeah, I see a bunch of images.
My website. So you asked about my website. So, okay, let's take a look. So I love this image. So I really love this image. Why? Because it's something different. Because I like very complicated, complicated wide-angle compositions. But this is something completely different. So it's just a telephoto shot, and it's very simple composition. But what I really like here is that it's just the atmosphere that speaks for itself. So it was, I planned the shot actually. So I was earlier, 1 week earlier, I was at this tree and I shot, it was very early morning, it was a beautiful sunrise, and I shot the sunrise with this tree, also a very simple shot. And then I actually thought, oh, next week it's full moon, maybe I can do the same with this tree with the moon. So I actually took my PhotoPills planner app, and I checked if it was possible. And yes, from the other side, I had a lot of space. So I used a telephoto lens, like 200 millimeter or something. And on a very foggy morning, I took this image, and I already had the image in my head. So I knew it was going to be foggy. And I hoped that that this is a setting moon in the very early morning. So I already had some first light in the image. And then I had, the moon just lighting up all that fog, like this purple atmosphere that I really like. And for people who have seen the Pink Panther, maybe looks a bit familiar. I called it the ancestral plane from that movie, basically. So
you mean
really
the Black Panther or the Pink Panther?
Yeah. No, the Black Panther. Did I say Pink Panther?
Okay. Oh, I was thinking the old Pink Panther. I was like, wow.
No, man.
I had the theme song stuck in my head.
The Black Panther. No. The Black Panther movie. Yeah,
Two
sorry about this.
completely different movies.
sorry. Anyway, that's But anyway, this picture is just, it's about the atmosphere. Not so much. It's a good composition, but it's a very simple image. It's a simple image, but the atmosphere just really works for me here, and that's why I wanted to show that one. I have many images like this. This is an example of like the wide angle that I really like. So shooting with a wide angle with focus stacking, with these green roots on the foreground and this blasting light rays in the background. This stuff I really like, with wide angle and getting close, this kind of stuff. This one I also really like, but I will not take too much time. So
this is just great. This
okay.
Is beautiful.
Anyone else?
What a great. What's the URL to your website, Albert?
AlbertDros.com. Yeah.
Easy.
AlbertDros.com.
Beautiful
Definitely
work.
Check
Thank
it
you,
out.
man. Thank you.
Sure.
We could spend all day going through these images for sure, and I'm sure we'll chat again about this stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Bastian, you wanna show us a couple of your shots?
Actually, it's also on my homepage. It's a website. It's bastianw.de, because normally I'm normally more into the German market. And those are my favorite storm shots from Europe. Actually, it's not thunderstorms, it's a windstorm. And I really, really love this shot here, because I had this image in my head for 5 years. I'm not joking about this. It's a lighthouse in the west side of Portugal, in Porto.
Wow.
And I actually had to put really, really much planning in it, because I needed to have high flood, so spring flood, and also I needed a windstorm from the right direction, coming in from the northwest, with waves around 6 to 8 meters, hitting directly on the coast. And I took a plane in the morning, and 1.5 hours after landing in Porto Airport, I got this shot ready. And I was just, I just loved it, because it was one of my dream shots. I wanted to do one of those lighthouse shots with the waves behind it. And like you can see, I'm really chasing different lighthouses in whole Europe, also always checking if there are windstorms, and I have also a big map with every possible lighthouse in Europe you could shoot in a storm, because the lighthouse needs to be inside of the sea, and you need a place where the waves are breaking on the lighthouse. If there's just a beach, long beach with a lighthouse, you won't have breaking waves directly at the lighthouse. And so it's a little bit more complicated to find those spots. And last year, December, I also took a helicopter. We took a helicopter flight to Brittany in France.
Wow.
And we flew 3 hours over the open sea with one of the most craziest helicopter pilots ever. So you see this wave in the middle, it's actually the same height than the helicopter itself. So we are flying, this is not the drone shot, we were actually like 5 meters above the water in this shot.
Oh, yeah. That could have gone sideways or vertical.
Yes. Sometimes I took the view outside of the cockpit, and I saw that there was a wave higher than the helicopter coming in, and he was like, "Oh, we need to go up," and just put the helicopter a little bit into the air, and the wave was going smooth under my feet, and I nearly could touch it. But yeah, wow. Pretty crazy guy.
That's great, man. Fantastic shots, obviously. Thank you for sharing those. All right, last but not least, Elia Locardi.
Okay, yeah. So this is Japan, what? And when I started doing this it was really like 2009, I think, and then in 2011, 2012, I was like, if I could, what I want, and if you've ever walked into a store and you're buying picture frames, you're like, oh, that's Paris, oh, that's Rome, oh, that's I wanted to be able to have somebody look at an image and understand where it was without me telling them. So if I thought of a location like Japan, I was like, what elements represent Japan the best? Is it the cherry blossoms? Is it Mount Fuji? Is it about the architecture, pagodas, anything like that? And this image was interesting because the first time I was in Japan was 2010 or 2011, and I was shooting in Tokyo and Kyoto, the first route that you always take. And I'd like seen this little thumbnail image of this. It looked fake, like a drawing, like this pagoda, this red pagoda in Mount Fuji. And I was sending it to my friends in Japan. I'm like, where is this? They're like, that doesn't exist. That's just somebody made that. That's a composite. I'm like, okay. So a couple of years later, I was like sharing this again. I'm like, no, this has to exist somewhere. It's not a drawing. And then my buddy who actually lives in this town, Fujiyosuda, he's like, yeah, that's our shrine. That's right above our city. And I'm like, no way. So I go, and I'm like the only person there all day for a couple of days. But I mistimed it because the cherry blossoms weren't actually blooming in this area. So I didn't get anything that I wanted. So I'm like, you know what? Next year, I'm going to get this. So went back the next year, shot mornings and nights. And I didn't get the shot then either. It was just, overcast and ugly. And the third year that I went here, I actually was able to get the shot that I wanted. Not exactly what I wanted. I wanted the sunrise, this is the sunset. But it encompassed everything that I love about Japan. It has a beautiful pagoda with the red. They use the different red and oranges, the cherry blossoms, Mount Fuji, and dynamic clouds and weather. What happened after this, years later, and up to current, is it became a really popular tourist destination. When I was shooting here, there may have been a few other Japanese photographers in the morning and nobody else, and this was a pretty new shrine. And over the years, I started noticing like you can't even, you have to camp out overnight just to take the morning shot now. And they have like pagoda viewing station and pagoda Wi-Fi and pagoda ice cream. And they started making it so bad that you can't even really get the shot. And it's just people standing in front of people, pushing iPhones through arms and stuff like that. And I got really depressed about that. I actually got really depressed. And in my presentations, I started using that example of accidentally creating something iconic and taking it away from the locals. Because I thought all those people who were jogging in the morning and had this place to themselves, a very spiritual place, now it's ruined by me and Instagrammers and things like that.
Right.
I was at Adobe Max, and a friend of mine was there, and I was Kenji Namamura. I was with him, and I told him the story, and he's like, "No, Elia, you saved it." And I'm like, "What do you mean you saved it?" He's like, "They literally were going to close that down. They didn't have the money to keep it open. They were going to shut it down, take down the pagoda, and basically, keep it closed. And the mayor saw your photo, and he started thinking, wow, we can make this into a tourist attraction. He's like, so you saved that location from being taken down. And I was like, are you kidding? I've been depressed about that for years. And now you tell me that I did that. But I think it for me, it was, and again, circles back to that over tourism area, is the representation of an area back then, anywhere between 2011 and 2014 into early 2015 was a lot easier to deal with because of the less density of people. Like the areas in the world, Kyoto, the bamboo forest in Japan, or areas in Italy, Venice, they were busy, but not to the level that they became pre-COVID. And that's because of us. That's because of Flickr and 500px. That's because of Instagram. That's because cameras are easy to access. We kind of broke the planet that way. So now what I'm thinking, it's like Albert too. It's like I did start, what attracted these places. I think Albert and I first met in Vernazza. We were both shooting in Vernazza. I won't tell the whole story of Albert. This first time with Albert.
Please don't.
We became friends many years ago. Oh yeah, no, it's hilarious. It was a couple of years, but we started with these iconic places. But back then, I mean, Albert, I think there was like one other person up there with us. If you go there any given evening now, that time of year, and it's dozens of people standing packed shoulder to shoulder to shoulder, and that changed things for us. So now it's about not just finding these beautiful locations, but finding the surrounding locations. And for Albert, it was, man, I can go to Kyrgyzstan and get these amazing images, tell these amazing stories, and it's off the normal tourist track. And for me, it's like, maybe I can lead people away from that area and preserve it a little bit longer. Because I feel like, Venice being the classic example of over-tourism, is we're in a situation where, they've survived plagues, they've survived sieges, they've wars, earthquakes, fires, and cruise ship tourism is going to destroy it. Like, come on, like, how ridiculous is that? Like, we as tourists are going to destroy this location. And that just, that's sort of what I was working on up until, 2020. COVID has kind of changed the landscape, and we actually have a few years where we can put in the correct infrastructure and hopefully shift this balance around and sort of preserve these areas, because it's not just the preservation of it physically, it's the preservation of it mentally. If you've never been to Rome and you visit the Colosseum, don't go in the afternoon. You don't want to do a selfie with the gladiator. You don't want somebody like trying to sell you a tripod. You want to be able to walk around, and now even first thing in the morning, people are going, they're getting busy too. You want to be able to experience these places for what the reason they drew you there in the first place. So Frederick and I are obviously probably maybe the oldest ones here, where we like looked at National Geographic magazines, you know what I mean? Like we got our motivation from that. I actually thought about joining to be a frontline photographer too. Post 9/11, I actually almost went to Iraq as a videographer. Like, I wanted to tell that story. But it was, all these images that I saw, they were, it was because National Geographic. It's like, I saw that. It's like, man, I've been looking at tiger's nest in Bhutan for like 20 years,
That's
and
crazy.
then to get to visit it. And then when there's a coffee shop, there's not it there, but it's like, it's changed. People, the Paris, municipality of Paris tried to stop the people from selling the little trinkets because it broke the Western dream of Paris when people were there. And you're trying to, you have this feeling of this place. And I think that preservation is what I'm looking for, and preserving it in these photos. But it's also so can preserve that emotion for people, the reason that they may have traveled here in the first place, to feel this or to see this or to experience that. I don't think, like we were talking about, it's my responsibility, but that is my goal, to encapsulate the emotional connection we should be having with these places.
The conversation just sort of around vision and philosophy and just your individual approaches to your art, I think has been really, really helpful and insightful and inspirational for me, and hopefully a bunch of people that are watching this. So thank you guys for this. Let's wrap it up with just real quickly, for people that want to connect with you, what's the best location for them to go? Bastian, why don't you kick us off? Where would you like people to go to connect with you?
It's probably best Instagram, but I only post in German, so maybe you can check out the image and you can use the Instagram translate. It's bastianw.de on Instagram. It's also my website link. And you can travel with me. No, not the world, but now you can travel some places in Europe for weather. And now it starts with the most beautiful time in Germany when comes the autumn and fog. We have so many castles all around here with autumn and red. So it's getting pretty beautiful there.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Albert, what about you? If people want to, we've seen your website, or any other locations where you'd like people to reach out to you at?
I mean, on my website, www.albertdros.com, it's very simple. All my channels are there, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. If anyone has a question to me, feel free to ask it on any channels or send me an email. I always respond. If anyone wants to see my complete workflow, how I edit my images, I just released a course actually 2 weeks ago. So definitely check it out on my website if you're interested in that. It has everything, Lightroom, Photoshop, and of course Luminar. So just check my website. That's it. And thank you for having me on the show, of course. Thank you.
No, thank
thanks
you.
Everyone for watching. Definitely.
Yeah, no, for sure. And Elia Locardi, where should people go to catch up with you? And also, as we wrap this up, tell us a little bit about that Moments in Time project, because that's people are in the chat talking about how amazing that is. What's the story behind that?
Oh, thanks. That in the chat, that's probably my mom, just so you know. She likes
Thanks, Mom.
it. No, thank you for people who have been following that. That is a self-funded passion project too. So it's it's what I've been wanting to do for the last few years of my life. So yeah, my social media is all Elia Locardi. You can go to my website to find things. Albert's tutorial is actually fantastic. I'd recommend that one too. But we've done Photographing the World since 2014. We have about 60 hours of online workflow content from all over the world. There's a behind the scenes series called Photographing the World Behind the Scenes, which is basically me and the F-Stoppers guys making jokes at each other and them hating on Italian food. If you're a fan of that series, you know that Lee has a war against European showers. So that's fun to watch. That's free. There are free tutorials out there, but Moments in Time is meant to be free. We're in season 2. We have another episode coming out in 2 weeks that takes place in parts of Siem Reap and a village called Kopon Pluk. That's a really interesting place. So that is, there is photography education in that, but it's sort of a lighter sense. We're really trying to get into these areas to learn photography from some of the most talented people in the world. We even have 2 episodes actually. Albert's the only person who's been in 2 episodes of Moments in Time, and we learned from him.
Windmills and King's Day.
Windmills, King's Day, tulips.
Yeah.
So the element of Moments in Time, it has a few elements. It has visiting these amazing locations, but more importantly, the show's not about me. It's about these people that we visit. It's about talented artists like Albert, talented artists like Sara Lando from last season, Francesco Gola. This new season is about locations. So we were in Jakarta before that, the Philippines with Jan Gonzalez, Win Maxino, who's also a Skyline ambassador. It's really learning their what makes them passionate, what they're passionate about in photography. And one of the things is they have to put me in an uncomfortable situation too. So there are a lot of jokes in that show, but it's structured to be entertaining and fun. So if some of you have seen it, and you're enjoying it, that's great, because that's the only intention and agenda it has, is to be entertaining, free, and fun. And that's Moments in Time. So that's right now it's on YouTube. There might be some cross-publishing in the future, but right now it's all basically YouTube or momentsintime.tv.
All right. Well, we'll leave it right there. You guys get back to whatever you're doing, hopefully shooting or editing images or something cool like that, or playing
Dinner time.
Texas.
Dinner time. Dinner time. What are you talking about? It's not even lunchtime. Come on, Albert.
It's almost 8 o'clock for me.
It's past his bedtime. That's okay.
Yeah. Well, good. This is fantastic. We'll have to do this again if you guys are willing. I could talk to each one of you individually for hours and together for an entire day, I'm sure. So yeah, thank you guys. And thanks everyone who participated in the chat. Thank you, Skyloom, for facilitating this, and looking forward to seeing what Skyloom releases upon the world very shortly with Luminar AI.
No, definitely.
All right, guys, thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.